It's crazy how the most ordinary things, like just like the smallest actions, can have huge consequences. Like, take Francisco Acevedo, for example. You probably haven't heard of him, but this serial killer got caught because of something so, like, random and unconnected.
Hmm.
You'll wonder how he got away with anything for as long as he did.
Hmm.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into Acevedo's case, looking at his life and crimes.
Right.
We're going to be using biographical data and news reports from around the time of his conviction.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this case? It shows how human behavior and technology all come together in this pursuit of justice.
Right. Okay, so let's just start with the guy himself. Francisco Acevedo, born in 1968.
Hmm.
Right away, his early life is just like instability, divorced parents, substance abuse issues from when he was really young. It's like you can see the path laid out for him.
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you mean. But we have to be careful about saying that kind of stuff, that a difficult childhood automatically makes a criminal. I mean, it doesn't. But you can definitely see how these early experiences contributed to some of Acevedo's later struggles. He dropped out of high school, went from job to job, never really finding his place. There's
Yeah,
a clear pattern of impulsivity and just a lack of direction.
totally. And then there's this incident in 1986, almost like a blueprint for the awful things he would do later.
Mhm.
Acevedo was convicted of sexual assault. He picked up a woman, drove her somewhere isolated, tied her hands, and blindfolded her.
Wow.
And it's practically the same method he used for his later crimes.
This early act of violence is critical because it shows a specific way he did things, a modus operandi, the control, the domination, the restraints. These things become his signature in his later crimes. It wasn't just the assault itself, it was about power over the victim.
It's a scary thought, almost like he was practicing getting better at his technique.
In a way, yes, and these horrible techniques were used on 3 women in New York. Between 1989 and 1996, each of them was strangled, found naked, and posed, which makes his psychological profile even more complex.
Okay, so help me understand this. When a killer poses their victims, what's that all about? It's got to be more than just the murder, right? Like there's something more to it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Posing the victims can be a way for the killer to, keep control even after death, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Some killers will arrange their victims in ways that dehumanize them, turning them into objects. Some might pose them to fulfill certain fantasies. In Acevedo's case, the specific poses weren't really made public,
Okay.
but this behavior suggests someone really disturbed, someone who feels powerful by manipulating and controlling the victims, even after they're dead.
And there's another layer to this case. All three of the victims were prostitutes. How do you think that affected the investigation or even just public perception of the case?
Sadly, crimes against sex workers are often ignored. There's this stigma that can cause biases, both conscious and unconscious.
Right.
And it impacts everything from how law enforcement investigates to how the media reports it.
It's like their lives are less important, their deaths less tragic, just because of their job.
You're right, and that bias can mean that there are fewer resources put into solving the crime, less media attention, and in the end, a lower chance of the perpetrator being brought to justice.
That's really sad. So even though they had DNA evidence, the case went cold for over 10 years. It wasn't until 2009 that something completely unrelated changed everything. Acevedo was arrested for drunk driving.
His fourth DUI.
Wow, his fourth. And here's where it gets crazy. For his parole application on that DUI, Acevedo gave a DNA sample. Totally normal, routine procedure. But it was the key to solving everything.
It's wild, right? He handed detectives the missing piece of the puzzle without knowing it. That one simple act connected him to the murders and finally got justice for the victims and their families.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like if he hadn't gotten that DUI and had to give that DNA sample, would those murders still be unsolved? Would Acevedo still be out there?
Chilling thought, for sure.
So let's talk about the trial. Acevedo always said he was innocent. He admitted to having sex with the victims, but said he didn't kill them. I mean, that must have been a hard defense, especially with the DNA evidence.
You'd think, right. But even with cases that seem straightforward, the legal side can be really tricky. Acevedo's lawyers couldn't just ignore the DNA evidence. They had to find a way to make the prosecution's story seem less believable.
Okay, so how'd they do that? What was their plan?
I think they focused on trying to discredit the timeline the prosecution put forward, suggesting that maybe someone else could have committed the murders after Acevedo was with the victims.
Trying to create reasonable doubt. That's a classic move.
Exactly. And they probably also tried to make Acevedo seem more human to the jury. Maybe by talking about his rough past, his addiction problems, anything to make him seem less like a monster and more like a flawed person who made some mistakes.
It's interesting how much strategy goes into these trials, like super high-stakes chess. But in this case, the evidence seemed pretty overwhelming. You mentioned the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict.
Yeah, it was only one day of deliberation. Then the jury found Acevedo guilty. It shows how strong the prosecution's case was and the power of forensic science.
So where is Acevedo now?
He's currently serving 3 consecutive 25-to-life sentences at Greenhaven Correctional Facility. It's a maximum security prison, you know. It's known for housing some of the most dangerous criminals in New York.
Wow. That's a huge change from the life he lived before.
Yeah.
Freedom replaced with, well, no freedom.
Yeah. It brings up questions about justice, the reasons for punishment, and whether our prison system works. But before we get into all that, let's talk a bit more about the trial itself.
Okay, sounds good. What were some of the specific arguments and legal moves that happened during the trial? I'm curious about how it all went down in the courtroom.
Well, one thing stands out. The rape charges against Acevedo were dropped. Yeah. Which is really interesting because it might show how the legal system deals with consent, especially when sex work is involved.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. Why were those charges dropped, and what does that tell us about how they approached the case?
Well, it's complicated, but the prosecution probably had to carefully think about how strong their case was. Because of the victims' jobs, it might have been hard to prove lack of consent beyond a reasonable doubt.
So maybe they thought it was better to focus on the murder charges where the evidence was super strong instead of risking losing on the rape charges.
Exactly. It shows the kind of strategic thinking that goes into a case like this, especially with these tough issues around consent and sex work.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even with what seems like overwhelming evidence, the legal process can be really nuanced. But in the end, the jury saw through Acevedo's claims, and he was found guilty. Now he's dealing with the consequences, spending the rest of his life in prison. So before we move on, I wanted to ask, what do you think Acevedo was thinking during all of this? Was there any remorse? Did he take responsibility for what he did?
That's the question, isn't it? Unfortunately, we just don't know for sure with Acevedo. Some serial killers claim they're innocent right until the end, no matter what. They won't admit the pain they've caused. Others might say they're sorry, but it's hard to know if they really mean it or are just trying to manipulate the system.
It's pretty scary that we might never really understand what motivated him, what made him do these horrible things. But maybe we can get some insight by looking at his life now in prison.
Yeah, that's a good point. Looking at his life at Greenhaven might give us some clues about his mental state, how he's dealing with his situation, and the long-term impact of his crimes.
On that note, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take a look at Acevedo's life inside Greenhaven. We'll see what it's like for a convicted serial killer to live in one of the toughest prisons in the country.
Yeah, Greenhaven is, it's known for being tough. The conditions are harsh, and the criminals there are, well, they're hardened. For Acevedo, with his multiple life sentences, it's gotta be a shock. Nothing like the world he knew before.
I can imagine. So what's it actually like in there? What does he deal with every day?
Think about a world with strict routines, constant watching, every move is controlled, everything you do is monitored, not much freedom, not much of, like, getting to decide things for yourself.
So he's lost control, right? The thing he wanted to have over his victims is now happening to him.
Exactly. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? And it makes you think about what punishment is really for. Is it revenge, rehab, or just keeping someone locked up so they can't hurt anyone else? It's complicated, no easy answers.
It really is. But let's go back to something you said earlier. You mentioned that they dropped the rape charges against Acevedo. Why would they do that? This was a really serious case.
Well, sometimes prosecutors stop charges, even big ones, if they think it'll make their whole case stronger. In this case, the DNA tied Acevedo to the murders, no question. But adding the rape charges might have made things messy, you know? It could have introduced doubt and given the defense something to, like, pick apart.
So they stuck with the charges that had the strongest evidence, the ones they knew they could win.
Exactly. Plus, don't forget the victims' jobs. Proving that there wasn't consent, like proving it beyond a reasonable doubt, can be hard, especially in cases that involve sex work.
It's sad that those biases can affect legal stuff, even in a case this terrible. But at least the jury didn't believe Acevedo's lies, and he was found guilty. He's got to live with what he did now, locked up for good. We've talked about the evidence, the legal strategy, the trial, all that. But I think it's important to remember the real people in this, the people whose lives were changed forever because of Acevedo.
Absolutely. It's easy to get lost in the details, but we can't forget the human cost. The victims, their families, the community, they all carry the weight of Acevedo's actions.
It's a reminder that these aren't just stories we read about. These are real people who died, families who are grieving and trying to move on.
And it goes beyond just those people, too. Crimes like these can make a whole community feel scared, vulnerable, like they can't trust anyone.
Yeah, I bet those families felt so much pain and uncertainty all those years, not knowing who did it. When Acevedo was finally arrested and convicted, there must have been so many emotions. Relief, anger, maybe even some closure. But I can't imagine those wounds ever fully heal.
It's a heavy burden to carry, for sure, and it shows how important support is for the families and the community as a whole.
Speaking of burdens, what about Acevedo? The burden of what he did, his life now at Greenhaven. Do we know how he's doing? How he's handling all of this?
It's hard to say. Information about a prisoner, like their mental state or how they're behaving, it's not something you hear a lot about, especially in a high-security place like Greenhaven.
So we're left guessing, huh?
Hmm.
Is he, sorry, does he regret what he did? Or has he just shut down, cut himself off from everything?
That's something people who study criminals think about a lot. Like, what happens to your mind in a situation like that? Can someone like that be rehabilitated? Or is he just going to be lonely and miserable for the rest of his life?
Those are tough questions, and they bring us back to the whole criminal justice system. What's it really about? Punishment, revenge, or is there a chance for redemption, even for someone who's done such awful things?
Those are questions people have been asking for centuries, and there's no right answer, no single approach that works for everyone. Every case, every person is different.
Yeah, it's a constant balancing act, trying to get justice for the victims, but also recognizing that even people who do terrible things are still human.
Right. And it forces us to face some hard truths about what people are capable of, the good and the bad in all of us.
It's a reminder that the world is complicated. It's not all black and white.
That's why cases like Acevedo's are so interesting. They make you think. They challenge what you believe about justice, punishment, about good and evil.
Okay, so we've talked about Acevedo's early life, the horrible crimes he committed, the crazy way he got caught, the trial, and his life in prison now. But there's something else about this case I want to talk about.
What's that?
Well, DNA was the key to catching Acevedo, right? Something as small as giving that sample when he was arrested for drunk driving, that's what ended up putting him away. It makes you think about the power of forensic science, how technology is changing the way we deal with crime.
You're right. Acevedo's case is a perfect example of how DNA technology is changing everything. It's like a superpower for law enforcement. They can find the bad guys, clear innocent people, and close cold cases that have been open for years.
It's like a whole new way of solving crimes, right?
Yeah.
The smallest piece of evidence can tell a whole story,
Ah.
reveal secrets that used to be hidden. But this power comes with a responsibility, right?
You got it. As this technology gets better, we have to think about how it affects our privacy, our freedoms, and the idea of a fair trial. It's a debate that's happening right now, and it'll keep changing as the technology gets even better.
It shows that every time we get something new, we have to figure out the challenges and how to use it the right way. We need to make sure these tools are used ethically, responsibly, in a way that protects justice and fairness.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance, and we need to keep talking about it and thinking about it.
Okay, I think this is a good place to stop for now. We've covered a lot, and I'm sure our listener has a lot to think about. When we come back, we'll look closer at forensic science, what it can do, and the ethical problems that come with it. Stay with us for the final part of our look into the case of Francisco Acevedo. We're back, and we've been talking about how DNA evidence has totally changed the game when it comes to solving crimes. It's like having this tiny detective at the scene, finding clues we couldn't even see before.
Yeah, it's a total game changer. All those cold cases, just sitting there, families waiting for answers. DNA gives them hope, a chance to finally get justice and some closure.
It's amazing how something so small, like the sample Acevedo gave when he got busted for drunk driving, can solve a mystery that had everyone stumped for years. It makes you wonder how many other cases are out there just waiting for that one little piece of evidence.
It's a really exciting time for forensic science, but there are definitely challenges too. Like, as we use these amazing tools more and more, we have to be careful about how they affect people's rights and privacy.
Right. We can't just celebrate the progress without thinking about the ethical issues. Where's the line when it comes to collecting and keeping DNA? How do we make sure this information is used the right way and not for other things?
Those are the big questions people are dealing with now. We need to find that balance, using this technology for good while also protecting individual freedoms. It's a conversation we all need to be part of, scientists, law enforcement, and everyday people.
Absolutely. We need to be informed, stay involved, and not be afraid to ask tough questions. But for now, let's get back to Francisco Acevedo. He's in prison for life, probably going to spend the rest of his days locked up in Greenhaven.
Yeah, that's the reality, and it shows how serious his crimes were. He took 3 lives, hurt so many other people, and now he's got to deal with what he did.
It's hard to think about, knowing that he'll never have the freedom he took from his victims. What do you think his life is like now, being in prison like that?
We can only guess, really. Probably a lot of isolation, regret, facing what he did. He has no control now. Everything he does is decided for him. His whole future is determined by the choices he made.
It's a whole different world from the one he used to know. His life was spiraling out of control, and he caused so much damage.
It's a reminder of how dark things can get, you know? How we all have the potential for violence inside us.
Yeah, and that evil can look like anyone. It can be hiding right in front of us. Even something that seems totally normal can end up having terrible consequences.
Acevedo's case has taken us on a real journey. We've seen how criminals think, how the justice system works, and the ethical questions we face with new forensic science technology.
And we're left with a lot to think about. Questions about good and evil, the point of punishment, and what role technology should have in finding justice.
It shows you what a deep dive can do, right? We've gone way past the headlines, looked at all the angles, and come out of it with a better understanding of, well, just what it means to be human, the good and the bad.
That's why these deep dives are so interesting. They make you think critically, question what you believe, and face how complicated the world really is.
So, as we wrap up our look at Francisco Acevedo, I want to encourage everyone to keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop wanting to know more. There are so many mysteries out there, stories to tell, and things to discover.
I couldn't agree more. And with that, we'll end our deep dive here. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those minds working.